Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is the 27th of January 2020, the first day of the Hebrew month of Shvat. Happy Rosh Chodesh. Thanks so much for joining us. I am coming to you from Jerusalem. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me during the week, Josh at thelandofisrael.com, on Facebook, Joshua Hasten or Josh Hasten Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and on Instagram as well. A lot going on in the news with Prime Minister Netanyahu arriving in Washington yesterday, along with opposition head Benny Gantz, to meet with President Donald Trump on the expected release of the so-called deal of the century. And we have some of those details which were leaked, and we can't verify 100% some of those details until the plan is actually comes out, which could be any time this week. I just heard perhaps on Tuesday after meeting with the two leaders, but we'll see what happens. But joining us now on the phone, a very special guest, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. He is an expert on U.S.-Israel relations. He also served as the Minister for Congressional Affairs at Israel's embassy in Washington. Also, he was Israel's Consul General to the Southwest United States, based in Houston. He joins us now on the line. Good morning to you, Ambassador Ettinger.
Good morning.
Now, I know we don't have all of the, we can't confirm, rather, all the details of the peace plan, but based on what we have heard, based on what we might know, what is your reaction? And we'll get to some of those details. What is your reaction to what has been released until now?
Well, first and foremost, we have a U.S. administration which, unlike its predecessor, the Obama administration, realizes that the Palestinian issue is not the centerpiece of Middle East affairs, and therefore this is the first administration that does not subordinate its policy to the whims of the Palestinians. Secondly, we have an administration which does not want to hold its own independence of national security action hostage to the UN, to NATO, to the Europeans, and therefore dwell on an independent initiative. And last and not least, we have an administration that realizes that Israel is a unique ally and should be bolstered for the sake of its own role, Israel's own role as a force multiplier for the U.S. in the Middle East. On all these elements, this is a very good initiative from the American and the Israeli perspective. However, there are other elements which are quite concerning.
So I'm going to get to some of the plan here. Again, as reported by the Khan news source or news agency, according to Khan, reported the other night, Israel, according to the plan, Israel would maintain control of Jerusalem's Holy Basin, the Western Wall, while some of the Arab neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, on the eastern side of the city, would be part of a future PA state. Israel will be able to annex 30% of Judea and Samaria, including all the communities in Area C, which is where they're located, the Jordan Valley. However, Israel will have to evacuate some of what are known as the outposts, some of them, and give the PA land in exchange for the annexed areas. A demilitarized PA state would be formed on 70% of the land. Gaza would have to be demilitarized. Israel would also have freedom of military action in a PA state. So those are just some of the details, or the alleged details. We don't have the plan yet in front of us, but I am also concerned, especially about the fact that the plan might have the words PA state in them, even if the PA would reject, as they have done, reject every plan until now. It's still a little bit disconcerting to me when we're talking about a PA state and turning over 70% of land in Judea and Samaria. Can you comment on that, please?
In my mind, anyone who assumes that a Palestinian state can remain demilitarized or de-terrorized is not acquainted with the Middle East reality and with the Palestinian track record. There is a direct correlation. There has been a direct correlation between the scope of Palestinian Authority on the one hand and the scope of Palestinian terrorism on the other hand. The larger the scope of Palestinian Authority, the more intense has terrorism been. And the delusion that the Palestinian state can remain demilitarized defies experience, defies Middle East reality. We were told that the Oslo Accord of 1993 would produce a demilitarized Palestinian entity. We were told that the disengagement of Israel from Gaza would render Gaza demilitarized. On both accounts, we experienced much more dramatically more intense terrorism. Moreover, there is a very obvious Palestinian track record. When the Jordanians allowed Palestinians to exercise more authority in Jordan back 1968 through 1970, it produced a major civil war in Jordan, which almost toppled the pro-U.S. Hashemite regime. When Lebanon allowed the Palestinians to exercise much local authority in Lebanon, it produced a series of civil wars. It produced a Syrian invasion into Lebanon. When the Kuwaitis hosted the Palestinians, Mahmoud Abbas, Arafat, and their relatives and allies, it resulted in Palestinian collaboration with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. And one wonders whether the architects of the current plan, whether they are Israelis or Americans, are or aren't aware with that track record. My concern is that the architects are very preoccupied with the short run and are detached from the very grave long-term consequences of an establishment of a Palestinian state, which some may call a state minus or autonomy plus. Such an entity undoubtedly is going to result in much, much more intense and grave terrorism, which could threaten the very existence of the Jewish state.
So I want to understand this correctly, Ambassador. So you're saying that even with the unprecedented Israel relationship with the current administration in Washington, the Trump administration, you think that, based on what you just said, perhaps some of those who put together the plan are being nearsighted and don't really know or don't really understand or don't have the knowledge of what has transpired here since Oslo, and perhaps, put together a faulty plan, since it does include the mention of a PA state? What's your take on that?
Well, you mentioned the current administration. Anyone who devises a national security plan or any plan has to have the long run ahead of him or herself. Namely, there is a current administration with a current attitude towards Israel. No one knows what will be the shape of the U.S. administration comes January 2021. Moreover, we have currently a very, very peaceful border with Jordan. The border with Jordan, 500 kilometers, is the longest border, the most critical border, and the closest to the most sensitive sites in Israel: Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport, Freeway 6, the coastal plain, etc. Today, it's the most peaceful border. In an hour, tomorrow, there could be an upheaval in Jordan. Jordan is a pretty fragile entity. This could transform Jordan from the most peaceful neighbor into a Muslim Brotherhood-like neighbor, into an Ayatollah-like neighbor, into a PLO-like neighbor, which would present a devastating national security challenge for Israel, with a Palestinian state west of the river and a non-Hashemite regime east of the river, this could present Israel with a real, clear, lethal, deadly threat.
So overall then, bottom line, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? As our Prime Minister is already in Washington, and as is our the head of the opposition, Benny Gantz, getting ready to meet with President Donald Trump this afternoon, if I'm not mistaken, with meetings also on Tuesday. Optimistic, pessimistic, and why?
I'm concerned. I'm not pessimistic, optimistic. I'm very concerned. And my number one concern is that the architects of the agreement, the Israeli leaders, American leaders, may ignore the unpredictable, the volatile, the violent nature of the Middle East. And more than that, we keep hearing that there will be demilitarization, that there will be an accord. There may even be a Palestinian recognition of a Jewish state in Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state. And it's mind-boggling because in the Middle East, on words, one does not pay custom. When the Jordanian-Israeli peace agreement was signed in October of 1994, the military command of the Jordanians told their Israeli colleagues that from their experience, Jordan's experience, that which the Palestinians sign in the morning, they tend to violate at night. We have experienced that in the Oslo Accord. We have experienced that in every single dealing with the Palestinians. And my concern is that the eagerness to achieve a so-called peace accord, a so-called deal of the century, may subordinate Middle East reality, which advise us to be extremely careful, but most importantly, never to devise a plan based on good case or best case scenario. In the Middle East, it's always either the bad case, the worst case, or the worst case which dominate the day in the Middle East. It's a frustrating reality, but it's the reality, the only reality which we have in the Middle East.
Well, of course, we're going to be monitoring the situation very carefully here on the Land of Israel Network with our show hosts, paying close attention to what develops over there in Washington. I want to thank you so much for your expert analysis. Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, it's always great to have you on the show. I appreciate it very much, and I'm sure we're going to talk again as this peace plan is launched, and we'll have to see what the future brings. But I want to thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take a short break right now and come back with everything in the news here in Israel. We'll talk more about the so-called deal of the century. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll take a short break and be right back.
This is Eve Harrow for the Land of Israel Network. You can start every week with me, hearing views and interviews with fascinating people, some well-known, others homegrown, about places I guide, ideas I have to get you thinking too. It's about the land. It's about my people. It's about our collective journey. Rejuvenation with Eve Harrow, Sundays on the Land of Israel Network. Listen in. Share the ride.
We are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is the 27th of January, 2020, the first day of Shvat 5780. Before we get to the news, I just want to read an email that I got this week. I always appreciate your emails. You can get in touch with me, Josh at thelandofisrael.com. It says here, Miriam writes, "Hi, Josh. I always appreciate your broadcasts and listen to them every week. Thank you so much, Miriam, for that. I'm glad you focused on the escalation of the murderous incitement, the PA targeting the Auschwitz anniversary gathering. I was hoping you would highlight the irony and eeriness of this calls for the death of Jews in the teeth of this prestigious gathering. So will they only come together in our precious capital to piously express their sorrow about the past? And there will not be one word about the obscenities being repeated just meters away from their luxurious accommodations. The echoes of the conference of world leaders held prior to the escalation of the final solution are deafening. Once again, the leaders are broadcasting their deafness in the midst of this cacophony, signaling with utter clarity their permission to the devils to proceed. Before it's too late, I hope someone can make demands on this body to speak up. So thanks so much for the letter, Miriam. And I agree, I perhaps did not make it obvious in last week's show. We're talking about last week's show and the irony between the calls of death for Jews here today in the modern age and the gathering last week, and a lot of the countries who gathered here turning a deaf ear to the incitement out of the Palestinian Authority, today's anti-Semitism. And if I wasn't clear, or if I left that to the listener to draw the comparisons and the parallels without stating it explicitly, I apologize for that. And Miriam is absolutely correct. The irony of the fact that all these leaders gathered focusing on the past and not focusing on the current reality, the current anti-Semitism, of course, the PA being one of the main instigators, one of the main sources of modern-day anti-Semitism through their official media, on the radio, in their school books. Iran, of course, being another source of modern-day anti-Semitism. So, yes, I heard our leadership, specifically the Prime Minister Netanyahu, referencing Iran. I don't know how much I recall other leaders bringing that up, of course, saying never again, never again, never again, yet some of these leaders actually meeting with Mahmoud Abbas and traveling to Ramallah and traveling to Beit Lechem and whatnot, and meeting with PA officials, despite the fact that they are perpetrators of modern-day anti-Semitism and blood libels, and we'll get to that later on in the news as well. But thanks very much, Miriam. In regard, going back to the speculation about what the Trump deal of the century includes, at this point here, recording at 9 a.m. on the 27th Israel time from Jerusalem, we don't officially have the peace proposal. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz are in Washington, and we'll see if perhaps Trump is releasing his plan today, tomorrow, the next day. We'll see what happens. Of course, all that speculation in terms of what is actually in the plan. But Defense Minister and Yamina leader Naftali Bennett, as reported by the Jerusalem Post, said yesterday that his party would support the Trump peace deal if it includes terms allowing Israel to annex communities in Judea and Samaria, but he would never support the establishment of a Palestinian state. Of course, the Arabs, in order to get to that point, have to recognize Israel, according to the plan, have to recognize Israel as the Jewish state and have to de-escalate and disarm, Hamas in Gaza and all these other stipulations. Let's see how they react, even though at this point they're not even having a conversation with the Trump administration. Naftali Bennett's comments appear to be somewhat ambiguous, since it is thought that the Trump peace plan will include a form of autonomy for the Arabs in parts of Judea and Samaria, although the scope of that autonomy is unclear. He said, before us and the Israeli government is a once in a half century opportunity to apply Israeli sovereignty over 500,000 Israelis in 1 week, in reference to proposals made by members of his party to annex Judea and Samaria immediately. Bennett said, in answer to the question of whether Yamina will support the plan, he said, quote, if you apply sovereignty, we will support it. If you don't apply sovereignty, we won't support the plan. He said the failure to annex the communities in Judea and Samaria would be the lost opportunity of the century. But he said that under no circumstances would he allow the establishment of a Palestinian state, nor will he recognize one. So, again, taking parts of the Trump plan and saying that they're positive, specifically the annexation aspect, but again, I don't know how that jives with the fact that the Trump plan does explicitly, according to the speculation, does say that there will be a PA state one day on, I guess, approximately 70% of Judea and Samaria. We'll see exactly what the plan says perhaps in the hours ahead. At the same time, Samaria Regional Council head Yossi Dagan, he also left for Washington Saturday night to meet with members of Congress and Republican officials who are close to the president. His goal is to present to these allies of the communities in Judea and Samaria the red lines which must not be crossed in any future arrangement between Israel and the PA. This reported, by the way, by the Jewish press. According to Dagan, the plan is both, quote, the plan is both an important historical fact. First of all, we should praise President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has been leading an important strategic political line. It is our achievement that recognizing the communities of Judea and Samaria by the United States and also in Israel. However, we should also pay attention to the asterisks and small print. Dagan cautioned, we must be careful not to allow the words applying sovereignty become a smokescreen that covers our eyes from seeing the true meaning of this deal of the century. And Dagan claims, as we mentioned before, the Trump plan would include the establishment of a PA state and surrender about 70% of Judea and Samaria, which, of course, is a major problem. In my opinion, of course, that is the biggest, or one of the biggest downsides of the proposal, 70% surrendering of Judea and Samaria, and talk about the establishment of some form of PA state. On Saturday night, the Samaria Regional Council launched a campaign calling on the Prime Minister to apply sovereignty over all communities in Judea and Samaria, oppose a PA state, and refuse the so-called settlement blocks plan that would distinguish between communities inside and out of the blocks. The blocks, of course, referring to places like Gush Etzion and Ariel and the Jordan Valley and those areas. And I've said this for years, there is no difference between the so-called blocks and the rest of Judea and Samaria. It should all be under Israeli control. I do not think we should relinquish 1 inch of land to the Palestinian Authority. Every inch we relinquish becomes a new launching pad for terror attacks. The Palestinian Authority here with their chutzpah, warning that the Trump plan will spark mass protests. This is reported by the Jerusalem Post, and they're essentially threatening. This is a threat from the president, and I'm hearing this threat by the Palestinian Authority that they'll, potentially turn to violence. I would just shut the deal right then and there. I would say, you're getting nothing. That's what I would do if I was the president. This is the way you talk to us. You threaten us. You get nothing. And as pro-Israel as some people believe this plan is, I would make it even more pro-Israel, knowing that the PA is not our peace partner and that they're threatening the United States. So Khaled Abu Tuameh reports that the Palestinian officials warned over the weekend U.S. President Trump's plan, which is expected to be announced on Tuesday, saying it would spark a new wave of mass protests in Judea and Samaria. What are we talking about? We're talking about violence, emphasizing that the plan would not change the reality on the ground as far as they are concerned. The officials called for a series of protests to foil the, quote, Zionist American conspiracy. This sounds like anti-Semitic language to me. The Zionists in cahoots with the Americans, a conspiracy against the Arabs. This is incitement. This is anti-Semitism right here. A PA official in Ramallah warned that Israel and the U.S. were playing with fire. More and more threats. I would completely marginalize them. I would have nothing to do with them. And if it was up to me, I'd send them all back on a one-way ticket from where they came from and get them out of here. It would benefit both Jews and Arabs alike if the Palestinian Authority would go away. Terror and violence continues, launched by the Hamas and other terror groups in Gaza. I'm seeing here a picture from yesterday's newspaper, an RPG attached to balloons found outside Sde Boker. That is pretty far away. What is that, about 70 kilometers from Gaza? I mean, you have these balloons attached to explosive devices being launched regularly now, almost pretty much every day, if not multiple times per day. Another image I saw the other day was of explosives being hidden in a soccer ball and attached to balloons, and there is one purpose here, and that is to murder Jewish children, hoping that Jewish children, Israeli children, will see soccer balls in their yard, landing in their yard, and go out and play with them, and then be blown up or lose limbs. I mean, that is the goal here of Hamas and the other terror groups. Over the last 2 years, the Gazans have launched countless explosive and incendiary aerial devices into southern Israel, kites, balloons, and other, landing on highways, trees, playgrounds, private yards, and setting fires to tens of thousands of acres or dunam of forests and fields. Dozens of incendiary devices have been launched over the last 2 weeks alone. A senior Hamas official said last week that the recent spate, get this, the recent spate of explosive balloons that are being launched from Gaza was a signal to Israel to accelerate the unofficial agreement between the two sides. So you're talking about a peace deal, which is a joke within itself between Israel and Gaza. And how do you accelerate a peace deal? You launch incendiary devices. You launch balloons aimed at murdering Israeli children. That's how you further a peace deal. Absolutely nonsense. This has nothing to do with a peace deal. This has to do with their goal to murder as many Jews, and in this case, Jewish children, as possible. That is the reality. They can make up all their excuses, but it's so ironic. They say that they want a peace deal, therefore they want to hurry up a deal, so they're going to try to murder more Jews. It makes complete sense. This past week, we had all of the visitors, world leaders here in Israel for the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. Prince Charles spent some time here traveling to Bethlehem, where he made some comments also reported by the Jerusalem Post. He said, Bethlehem embodies, get this, the vital coexistence between Christians and Muslims. If that is the case, explain to me how Bethlehem, which was over 80% Christian, is now over 80% Muslims. The Christians have run away from Bethlehem. So how is it possible that he is saying that this is a symbol of coexistence between Christians and Muslims, where the Christians were persecuted under the Palestinian Authority and got out of there to the point where the stats show a complete flip-flop? While it was 80% Christian, Bethlehem is now 80% Muslim. How is that coexistence? I don't understand where he is coming from with his nonsense. He went on to say, no one arriving in Bethlehem today could miss the signs of continued hardship and the situation you face, talking to the people there, and I can only join you and all communities in your prayers for a just and lasting peace. So again, here he is using language, claiming that there is some sort of humanitarian crisis in Bethlehem, and without mentioning Israel, basically blaming Israel. We can read between the lines here. While he is not focused on the atrocities that have been carried out against Christians by the Palestinian Authority, and the fact of the matter, if they're having issues, if families are having issues in Bethlehem, it is because of the PA. The community there did a lot better when Israel was in control. Surely and truly a mistake for Israel to relinquish control of Bethlehem and all the other cities to the Palestinian Authority. Arut Sheva here reports, and we saw this explode on Twitter, Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib on Saturday retweeting and then eventually removing a false claim blaming Israelis for the death of an Arab child in Jerusalem. Arut Sheva here referencing an article by JTA. What happened was you had a child, and it's a sad story, an Arab child in Jerusalem who drowned in a large, I won't call it a puddle, but a pool of water as a result of the rains over the last week or so. And immediately you had PLO official Hanan Ashwari, who of course blocked me on Twitter. She claimed that the boy was kidnapped and murdered by Israeli so-called settlers. And basically you have a modern-day blood libel, when in reality this kid drowned, it's very sad, drowned, and unfortunately died. So you have Ashwari issuing the blood libel, you have it retweeted without any basis by the Congresswoman Tlaib, and then of course deleting it, but the damage done. Danny Dayan, Israeli Consul General in New York, criticizing her for retweeting the false information. He said, quote, "I'm always extremely cautious in criticizing U.S. elected officials. However, when an American elected official retweets an unfounded blood libel against Jewish Israelis, I cannot remain silent." So it's just another example of her anti-Israel hate. It's not the first time. I'm sure it won't be the last time. But again, in Jersey, other references here, Jersey City, the shooting there. Originally, she claimed it was carried out by a white supremacy group, and that, of course, was not the case. Oh, those what are they called? Those congresswomen there in Washington, Ben. The Squad, that's right, Ben Bresky, engineer extraordinaire, helping me remember the Squad over there in D.C. And we're going to finish the show here today, again, with some more positive news. The Kinneret continues to rise, up 3.15 inches since Friday, reported by the Jewish press. Water Authority spokesman Uri Shor announced that due to the flow of the Jordan River and other streams, the Sea of Galilee rose by 8 centimeters, 3.15 inches since Friday. It's now 210.41 meters below the Mediterranean sea level. Kinneret is almost up to the upper red level. It's almost the fullest it's been in I don't know how many years after several years of drought. Since the beginning of the rainy season, Kinneret level has risen by 1.49 meters, 1.13 of them coming since the beginning of January. Let it keep raining here, and everyone should be safe in the rain. But please God, we'll get more rain here, even though the holiday of Tu B'Shvat and a symbol of the beginning of spring is right around the corner, but it's still only January. So hopefully we'll get more water here in the rainy season. I want to thank Benjamin Bresky, engineer extraordinaire, Tabitha Epstein, for all she does behind the scenes. This has been another edition of Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com for Monday, the 27th of January, 2020, the 1st of Shvat, 5780. Have a wonderful Rosh Chodesh. Have a great week. And get in touch with me again. Happy to read your emails, Josh at thelandofisrael.com, Facebook, Joshua Hasten, or Josh Hasten, Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten, and on Instagram as well. Have a great week wherever you are in the wonderful world of ours. Most importantly, be safe. Shalom, shalom from a beautiful day here in the land of Israel and in our capital city, the capital, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem. Shalom, shalom.
The question is, why are the Jews there in the first place? The Jewish people have been yearning to return to their ancient homeland for a long time.
The Yishai Fleischer Show, the voice of a new generation of pro-Israel activists.
And there's only two kinds of minorities in the Middle East, armed or unarmed.
Inspiring minds to think differently.
That jihadism doesn't just attack Jews. It attacks Christians, and it mostly attacks Muslims.
Inspiration, spirituality, and politics.
So first and foremost, this country is here to defend Jewish people and to live in its ancestral homeland.
Listen to the Yishai Fleischer Show every week on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.